So let me just make a quick remark about how Russell argues for his theory. Actually, what he does in the paper is he states what the theory is first, and then he sort of gives you the reasons for why he thinks it's a good theory. I think it's slightly easier to think about it the other way around, to start thinking first about, well, why did Russell think we needed a theory like the one he's going to give us, and then later on see exactly what he says about descriptions. So in this video we're going to think about 3 different puzzles that Russell uses to motivate his theory. Because the way that he argues for his theory of descriptions is that he says, well, here are a bunch of puzzles for how we should think about descriptions. If you think about them, it's really not clear how they're able to do certain things. And his argument for his own view is that, well, my view solves these problems, so because it's the best explanation of what's going on with descriptions, you should like my view. That's basically the way that Russell argues in this paper. He gives an argument from best explanation for his theory of descriptions. So let's talk about the 3 puzzles. The first one we might call the puzzle of non-existence. So just like names, there are descriptions that seem to talk about things that don't exist. Russell's example is the King of France, or the present King of France, and in fact it's just as good an example now as it was then. Because there is no King of France. France isn't a monarchy, it's a republic. Like, there is no person in the world that actually talks about. And yet, it seems like we can easily make sense of claims that talk about the King of France. So take this claim. The King of France is bald. That's a perfectly intelligible claim, Russell thinks. Now, obviously, there's no entity in the world that corresponds to this description, this definite description of the King of France, but it doesn't seem to be any obstacle to our understanding it. We perfectly well know what this sentence says. And moreover, Russell says, we know that this sentence is false. It's false that the King of France is bald, precisely because there is no King of France. So the question here is, how is this possible? How is it possible for this to be a meaningful false sentence, given that there just is no King of France? And for the same kinds of reasons that we talked about last week, when we talked about the problem of empty names and Frege, if you just thought that the description referred to an object in the world, it would be pretty hard to explain what's going on here. Because since there is no King of France, well, it looks like the expression, the King of France, if the meaning of a description was just the object it stood for, well, since there's no object, wouldn't this just be meaningless? And of course, if this part is meaningless, then how could the sentence as a whole, how could that make a claim? How could that say something false if a big chunk of it just doesn't mean anything at all? So that's the first problem. We can easily find descriptions that don't actually talk about something real. There is no King of France. And yet, sentences involving those descriptions, they still seem to say something meaningful. They can be used to make meaningful false claims, like these. That's Russell's first puzzle. Just as a quick aside, something I would encourage you to ask yourselves. So clearly there is something wrong with this sentence. Like, you couldn't go around saying the King of France is bald. Russell's very quick to say that means the sentence is false. It's worth thinking yourselves about, like, is that the right way to think about what's going on with this sentence? Or is there something else going on? But that's the way that Russell wants to set up this puzzle of non-existence anyway. The second puzzle that Russell talks about, again, is very similar to something we talked about last week with Frege. And it's a puzzle, we might call it the puzzle of informativity. And really the argument is very similar to the one that Frege gave last week. The idea is, well, if descriptions just refer to objects in the world, then shouldn't we just be able to replace a name with a description that talks about the same person? But in fact, it looks like we aren't able to do that. So let's take a concrete example again. So let's take the claim J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling. So again, that's an obviously true claim. Everything is identical to itself, so in particular, J.K. Rowling is identical to J.K. Rowling. Now, as a matter of fact, J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter books. She wrote all the Harry Potter books. So the description, the author of the Harry Potter books, well, that picks out the same person as J.K. Rowling. So if your view of descriptions was just that, well, the descriptions, they just mean whoever they pick out, then we should be able to replace, for example, this instance of J.K. Rowling with the description, the author of the Harry Potter books. But consider what that would actually look like. J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter books. These really seem to say very different things. This says something totally trivial that anybody would know, but this says something, pretty substantial. This is something that somebody could fail to know. Obviously, J.K. Rowling is actually very famous, but there probably are still some people out there who don't know who Harry Potter is. They've never heard of the books, and they don't know that J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter books. So this looks like something that somebody could fail to know, just if they don't have the right information about the world. But this is something that nobody really needs to know anything about the world to know. So then how could these say the same things? If this could be a legitimate discovery for somebody might discover that J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter books. How could that mean the same thing as J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling? Nobody could discover that J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling. So again, these look like they must mean different things. One could potentially be a discovery. The other is something that everybody knows. I'll give you just one more example. So Mark Twain / Samuel Clemens, he wrote Huckleberry Finn. As I'm sure everyone here knows. So if descriptions just refer to people, if that's just what they mean, then the description, the author of Huckleberry Finn, well, that just picks out the same thing as the name Samuel Clemens. But if descriptions just refer to things, that means that the name Samuel Clemens means the same thing as the author of Huckleberry Finn. But for just the same reasons as here, it looks like that's problematic. Like, we don't want to say that the description, the author of Huckleberry Finn, means the same thing as the name Samuel Clemens. Because you could easily know that Samuel Clemens is Samuel Clemens. But lots of people don't know that Samuel Clemens is the author of Huckleberry Finn. They know that Mark Twain is the author of Huckleberry Finn, but they don't know that Mark Twain is Samuel Clemens. And so they don't know that Samuel Clemens is the author of Huckleberry Finn. So that's a case where not only would it be a discovery, but actually lots of people just don't know the claim that Samuel Clemens is the author of Huckleberry Finn. But again, that's mysterious if the meaning of the description is just that person. As before, we can see this a little bit more clearly by looking at knowledge descriptions. So instead of just J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling, take the claim Alice knows J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling, Alice knows J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter books. And suppose Alice is just somebody who's heard of J.K. Rowling but knows nothing about her, and in particular doesn't know that J.K. Rowling wrote this series of books. In that case, it would be true that Alice knows that J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling. It would be false that Alice knows J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter books. But how could that be unless these sentences meant something different? Because remember, again, by compositionality, well, if they meant the same thing and if they were combined with the same other things, then the sentences as wholes should mean the same things. But if one is false and the other is true, well, then clearly they can't mean the same things. So again, this is another reason to think that descriptions can't just mean the same things as names which refer to the same person. The last puzzle Russell talks about is one sort of a logical nature. And it's because Russell was interested in logic and his early work in philosophy was all in mathematical logic and the relationship between that and the philosophy of mathematics. So as somebody who's interested in logic, he's very interested in this principle called the law of excluded middle. So let me write down what that says. I'll just say LEM. So basically the law of excluded middle says that for any sentence, either it or its negation is true. For any sentence P, either P or not P. So that should seem just like a very trivial claim. Think about any ordinary claim, so either it's raining or it's not raining. Sounds obvious. Either David Boylan is the professor or David Boylan is not the professor. Again, sounds kind of obvious. But what Russell observes is that a sort of puzzle arises when you think about descriptions in this context. Because if we think about lots of examples, it looks like law of excluded middle is obvious. It's something that we should think is true. It's a real law. It holds for any P that you might think of whatsoever. But let's go back to our King of France example. So remember, the present King of France, that's a description that doesn't pick out anything, because there is no King of France. And let's now consider the two claims. The King of France is bald. I'll just write KOF for King of France. And the King of France is not bald. So the law of excluded middle, if this were indeed a law, would tell us that one of these two things is true. Either it's true that he's bald, or it's true that the King of France is not bald. But Russell's question is, well, if this were just sort of like a name without a referent, then how could that be? So if the meaning of this is just what it refers to, but there is no King of France, then how do we make sense of either of these being true? Because think about it, like the way he puts it is, like, we can gather up the set of all the things in the world that are bald, we can gather up the set of all things in the world which are not bald, but you won't find a King of France in either category. You won't find the King of France among the bald people, and you won't find the King of France among the non-bald things, precisely because the King of France doesn't exist. There just is no King of France. But if that's right, then how could either of these two claims be true? But then, if neither of them were true, wouldn't the law of excluded middle, wouldn't that be false after all? And what Russell says, well, it really looks like the law of excluded middle is good. It really looks like that is a true principle. But then how do we make sense of what's going on here? Which one of these is really true or not? It's really hard to say that either could be true if you just thought that names refer to people, because, well, there just is no person that this description actually refers to. So that's the third puzzle, the puzzle that comes from logic, from thinking about this principle, the law of excluded middle. So this is what Russell is setting out to explain in his theory of descriptions. We have the puzzle of non-existence, which is, well, how can a claim like the King of France is bald? Why is that false rather than just meaningless? The second is this problem about informativity. Why is there this difference between claims like J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling and J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter books? And finally, what's going on with the law of excluded middle? Because when it comes to something like the King of France is bald, it looks like if you think that descriptions just refer to things, you can't say that either it or its negation is true. And that just directly contradicts the law of excluded middle.